Anyway, okay.
I don't remember this movie at all.
Okay, well, it came out in the late 80s. Like I said, it's older Xers, part of that Brat Pack thing, but it's that transition into adulthood. Okay, now I got it. We were talking about how, I have conversations with my sons that I would never have had with my parents. And I think that's generational. I think that when you look at Gen X, we are more open with our kids. It's so weird. We were talking about this. This was not part of any podcast or anything, but we were talking about this just offhand one day about the midlife crisis for Gen X and how they're saying it's going to hit later for us because we still haven't grown up.
No.
As a generation, we're still immature.
I don't know what it's going to take to grow up, to be honest. I just hope it never arrives.
I know, right?
Because growing up sucks.
It does.
I mean, I'm happy being a slacker. I don't really want to go beyond that.
But I think that gives us a connection with our kids too
It does.
On a level that our parents didn't have. Because if you look at it's interesting you brought up your dad, and I look at my parents when they were, I'm 43 and you're 44.
Yeah.
When they were our age, I remember at least my parents being this age and thinking they are much more advanced than we are at this moment, right?
They had to grow up sooner than we did.
They did. They had to grow up a lot faster.
My dad got married at 17.
Yeah.
I mean, he grew up on a farm, and at the age of 12, he was an adult.
Yeah.
Because that was required. I think our generation, we had the luxury of not having to grow up.
Yeah. And I think that factors into that masculinity thing.
I think so. Because a man had to do certain things in order to be successful. Women were naturally, not surprisingly, locked out of the workforce, or at least locked out of the kinds of jobs that they have now.
Mm-hmm.
So men were required to be the breadwinners, otherwise the family wouldn't succeed. So a lot of these gender roles were, they had kind of calcified and hardened and become rigid and set, and that's hard to give up. Mm-hmm. But when you start seeing women get into jobs that had been denied them before, it shouldn't be surprising that we see some of these ideas about what a man's job is. Because no longer, and that, again, I say this to be careful, because I suspect if you were to do the research, you would discover that men are still making the lion's share of the money. But I think the discrepancy between what men are making and their spouses are making is probably less than it used to be.
Yeah, it's shrinking.
It's still a travesty that men are making more, and that's got to change.
Yeah.
To do the same job, a man and a woman making different amount of money is unconscionable.
Right.
But we are seeing a shrinking margin between the two, and I think that allows us to do things a little differently.
Well, I know in our household, I do make more than she does, but it's not because she has the same job as me. She's in a completely different field that doesn't take a degree to do.
Yeah.
And so the monetary value is lower for her than it is for me. It doesn't mean she's not working as hard as I am. It doesn't mean that she's any less than me. But because I have an advanced degree, the monetary value that I present in the marketplace is higher than she does.
There's also a lot of cultural capital.
Yeah.
With having a master's degree, or having a PhD, and being in higher education, there's not as much cultural capital in your wife's job.
Yeah.
For better or for worse.
Yeah.
Or in my wife's job, for that matter.
Yeah.
Whereas having a doctorate and being a professor gives you a certain level of credibility that other jobs don't have. I remember when I was in college, I was looking at my sociology textbook, and I guarantee you it's changed since then, but they ranked jobs by prestige in the United States. And at the time the textbook was published, number one job in terms of prestige was university professor. Not doctor, not lawyer, not businessman or woman. Nope. It was an English professor.
If
or
it's not
university
number
professor.
one now, it's up there.
It's got to be in the top 5.
Yeah.
It's got to be in the top 5, and it's because it carries with it a certain level of cultural capital.
Yeah.
But because we're seeing, I think at least, women doing what had been regarded for so long to be men's work, you're going to see gender. You're going to see these gender roles challenged, masculinity in its current form, or in the form that our parents knew it. I would not want to be our parents right now, because it's got to be a horrifying world in which they live. Because their ideas of gender and masculinity and femininity were so set. And your dad and my father was the same way. The idea of getting an earring from my father, he told me, is if you ever get an earring, I'll rip it out. And he was serious.
Yeah.
Because he had very rigid ideas. The whole blue is for boys, pink is for girls. This is what boys wear. This is what girls wear. These are the kinds of things that boys are supposed to do. These are the kinds of things that girls are supposed to do.
Yeah.
And for them, it's that simple.
Yeah.
It's cut and dry, and as a result, their view of the world is simpler. It's a lot more complicated for us.
It is. I think one of the problems that has happened from, and I think I mentioned Dr. Spock when we were talking about this off camera. Well, maybe I did mention it. I can't remember. My memory's so bad anymore. Don't drink, kids.
Or teach English.
Because even once you drink and you stop and you sober up, I've been sober for 3 years now, and it's like my brain is still like, TMI, I know, but what was I talking about?
Teaching's an adventure.
It is. Oh, okay. So I think for us, and then because of who we are and how we have tried to bring up the younger generations, what we've done, and it's not our generation's fault, and it's not the culture's fault, it's just the way the culture shifted. If you look at the 80s, look at the movies between the 70s and the 80s. In the 70s, you had masculine characters.
Yep.
They were, it's Dirty Harry, Rocky. Well, Rocky's an interesting figure. Maybe we'll come back to Rocky. But you had Dirty Harry, you had Charles Bronson, you had all these different, very masculine, Chuck Norris, very masculine.
Bruce Willis.
Well, that's 80s, right?
Yeah.
But then you get to the 80s and you get these comedies like Animal House, like Revenge of the Nerds, like Porky's, where the jocks lose. And you see the shift. And you were talking about being emasculated on the way over here. They emasculate the jocks in these movies. Even if you look at a movie like Varsity Blues, where James Vanderbeek's character is dealing with, the popularity of being masculine versus the unpopularity of what he wants to do, which is intellectual, right? He's a smart kid, and he's battling that the entire movie. And what wins out? The masculinity.
Which is a shame.
It is.
Because it took my dad a long time. He was very proud of me that I had gotten so far in college. But I think there was a certain cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
That you could be both an intellectual and a man at the same time, and that you don't have to choose. Yeah. That you can still be both of these things simultaneously. And that you're not weak because you're an intellectual. Whereas, for him, and you see it in the movies that he watched. My mother and I were watching TV, and she wanted to watch one of my dad's favorite movies called McClintock, which is a John Wayne film.
Very familiar with it.
And I love that film. Yeah. But it is a quintessential boomer mentality about gender.
Is that the one where he grabs her by the hair?
I don't know if he grabs her by the hair, but it's the one where he spanks her.
Yeah.
To put her in her place.
Yeah.
And my father loved this movie, and it hit me the other day how confusing this must have been for him when I went to college, because they make fun of college boys in that movie.
Mm-hmm.
And they make fun of intellectuals in that film. And instead, what the movie is praising is self-made men who pull themselves up by their bootstraps.
Mm-hmm.
And all the college boys in the film look stupid.
Mm-hmm.
They're ridiculous figures.
Yeah.
And I think that's why, and you talked about this before too, why why the men of our parents' generation are so confused.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of them went to college.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do with that information? How do you settle that?
Yeah.
And again, when you tell a child, or tell your kid after he's finished how many years of college that, you know, that you're less intelligent than you were when you went in, because again, it doesn't
compute for them.
It doesn't compute for them.